Well, hey guys, it's Mr. Schauber. I wanted to just shed some light on this Sixth and Eighth Amendments PowerPoint and narrate this a little bit. You know, when James Madison compiled the Bill of Rights, each one of the 10 amendments that we ended up with was in there for a purpose and a reason. You know, five out of the first 10 amendments, half of the Bill of Rights, are protections for people in trouble with the law. The Fourth through Eighth Amendments all protect people who've been accused of or uh, are prosecuted for or convicted of a crime. And so this must have been a pretty important subject to Madison and the founding fathers if half of the Bill of Rights are devoted to this idea. So let's quickly speed through here the 8 parts of the Sixth Amendment. First, speedy trial. That doesn't mean that the trial has to be quick. Some trials take months to start to finish to figure out. But speedy trial means that from the time a person gets arrested, uh, the time they're brought to trial needs to be in a relatively speedy manner. They can't just be left to rot in jail for years and years before their trial. A public trial, the trial is open to people from the public to come and watch. And, there's a gallery that people can go and sit in the chairs and listen to the testimonies and the lawyers and this has to be open to the public. We don't want closed door secret trials held. That's not safe for anybody. So that's what public trial means. An impartial jury. A jury is to be made up of people from the community. Usually in a criminal trial, you have a 13-person jury, 12 main jurors, and one alternate in case one of the main jurors gets sick or something happens to them or they're removed from the case for some reason. But it's supposed to be people who don't have an, a bias and don't have a staked claim in the trial. When a person gets called for jury duty, they are called with a bunch of other people and they fill out a questionnaire and you get up when you show up at the courthouse and after a while you get up and you say the answers to your questionnaire and you talk about all kinds of stuff your how old you are and your marital status and what your family's like and where you get your news and what you do for a job and so forth. And both lawyer teams listen to each juror, and there are usually, well, at least 40 or more that are that go through this process. And the lawyer teams sit there and listen to every single one of them, and take notes on the jurors and what they say, and they make a list of potential jurors that they would like to have on the trial for whatever reason, whether they think that juror is going to help their case or whatever. But both lawyer teams do that, and when all the people, prospective jurors, are done talking, the lawyer teams get together, and uh, any juror numbers, okay, or any of the people on the prospective jury that they have in common, they keep, and then they work together. The lawyer teams do until they come up with a common list of 13 jurors. And so it takes a little while to do that. Oftentimes, might take a few hours, or maybe less, maybe more. But it's supposed to be an impartial jury, people who aren't related to members of the case, people who uh, you know, aren't neighbors of people in the case, people that don't have an interest necessarily in the case for themselves. Of course, some of these cases, it's pretty hard not to know something about the case. If it's a high profile thing, of course, members of the community are going to get called in to be potentially on the jury. They're going to have heard about the case probably, but that's okay as long as they're not partial. If they're found out to be partial, then and they're kept for the 13-person jury, then they will be removed. The location of the trial just means the trial needs to take place in the general location where the crime allegedly occurred. If a trial or if a crime occurred in Salt Lake, they're not going to hold the trial in New Orleans or Detroit. Okay, they're going to hold the trial in Salt Lake, and so that's just to make it easier, and that's the law. Information on charges simply means a person has to be told what they're being charged with. It can't be a secret. It can't be this nebulous thing. Well, we don't. It doesn't matter what you're charged with. You come with us. You're under arrest, or you're going to have a trial. No, it's you're being charged with this, and and so forth. Confronting witnesses means if you're on trial, you have a right to see who is testifying against you. They are not behind uh, some screen, or they're not behind some divider where you can't see them. You get to see who is testifying against you, and that's a right that you have. Favorable witnesses is if you're on trial, you have a right to have the witnesses that you choose to speak in your favor be there. And so if a person commits a crime or allegedly commits a crime, if their friends were there and that person wants those people to be witnesses for them in the case, then they have that right to do that. A person then would get what's called a subpoena and to show up in court and testify, and you have to go. You can't say, "Well, I don't think so. I think I'll sit this one out." No, I don't think so. That's not how it works. You show up and you are a witness for the person on trial, the defendant. Assistance of counsel means you have a right to a lawyer. And of course, they read that in the Miranda rights when a person gets arrested. But uh, the assistance of counsel is you have a right to an attorney and to speak with that attorney and get your story straight and get your case straight. And your attorney can do your talking in the courtroom. You don't have to speak in the courtroom, of course, as per the Fifth Amendment. You can if you'd like to speak, but you don't have to speak if you're the one on trial. You can have lawyers and witnesses do that for you. So that is kind of a summary of the Sixth Amendment. I won't spend long on this, but you can see this is a map for the state courts of appeals and district courts throughout the U.S. There are different districts. You can see the country's divided up into, and if a federal case occurs, and let's say we live here in Utah, and a federal case occurs here in Utah, you can go to of course, you'll have a case or a trial in the federal building in Salt Lake, for example. But if that case is appealed by either your side or the prosecution, then that case could go to the 10th Circuit and Court of Appeals, which is in Denver, Colorado. So anything that happens in, as you can see, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Oklahoma, or Kansas would end up in Denver if it's a federal case and if it's appealed. And the Court of Appeals there in Denver agrees to hear it. So that's how that works for federal cases. Of course, the highest federal court of appeals that we have is the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a 9-member court. You know all the logistics of it. They meet in this building, and they hold their position for life, or until they decide to retire. They can be impeached, although it rarely happens. The head of the Supreme Court, the guy in the middle there sitting, is the Chief Justice, and the Chief Justice heads up the Supreme Court. But these Supreme Court justices are appointed by the President of the United States, and they are confirmed. They're nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate, and that's how their appointment takes place. All right. The Eighth Amendment also is a protection for people who are in trouble with the law, and it has 2 parts to it. No excessive bail and fines, and no cruel and unusual punishment. Now, this leaves some room for interpretation, because what does excessive bail mean? And what is cruel and unusual punishment? Well, those are questions that have come up over the years. And so generally, here's what it means is this. If a person gets arrested for an alleged crime, the judge can set a bail amount. Bail is collateral. Bail is money a person must come up with, or their friends or family must come up with, to get them out of jail temporarily until their assigned court date. And so if a person steals a candy bar from a grocery store, a dumb example, but if they did that and got prosecuted for it and there was going to be a trial for it, then uh, the judge would probably not set the bail at $1 million. That would be excessive for that crime. The bail must fit the crime, so to speak. Now, if a person is wanted or suspected of a triple homicide, then maybe $1 million is not excessive, and that's for the judge to determine. And so that's what that means. No cruel and unusual punishment. Well, traditionally, the death penalty has been used in the United States, and from the beginning of the United States, it's been used. And so, is that cruel and unusual? Well, the United States has ruled that no, it's not cruel and unusual throughout its history. Although, in today's America, some states have permanently outlawed the death penalty, they've banned it. So, no matter what a person does, they cannot get the death penalty. They might get life in prison, but they will not get the death penalty. Some states still have it. Those that have it, some of them use it occasionally. It's not used nearly as much as it used to be, but we can talk about that in a second again. But that's the Eighth Amendment. No excessive bail or fines, no cruel and unusual punishment. Now, on the issue of bail and fines, when a person is arrested for an alleged crime, there are a couple of ways that the government can make sure suspects appear in court. So a judge will assign a court date for an initial court date for that person who it has been accused of the crime. And so one way to keep a person around so they make sure they show up in court is to just keep them in jail. And this is where the excessive bail and fines idea comes in. Sometimes people can't post bail, they can't come up with the money, and so they are stuck in jail until their court date, which will not be usually too far down the road, but that's one way to make sure they show up for their court date. If they post bail, if they come up with the money or their friends or family come up with the money, then they give the money to the government, is essentially what you're doing, whatever the bail amount is, and the person is out of jail temporarily until their court date. Now, when they show back up for their court date, they get that bail money back, at least to a degree. So that therefore it's like collateral. You show back up for your court date and you get your recover that bail money. If you don't show up for your court date, you forfeit the bail money. You're out bail money, and not only that, now you're a fugitive and you're wanted by the law, and people will be after you. So these are ways that the government has come up with to basically make sure, or try to make sure, that people show up for their court date when they're accused of a crime. Now, like we said, the cruel and unusual punishment part of the Eighth Amendment. What is that? What does that mean? Basically, what it has meant over U.S. history is that we don't use the torture methods. We don't use anything that is too unorthodox in order to punish people for their crimes. Now, some people would argue, well, wait a minute, the capital punishment, otherwise known as the death penalty, that is cruel and unusual. Well, there have been arguments about that, and there will continue to be arguments about that probably until the end of time. But traditionally, of course, we had various methods to use for capital punishment, whether it be hanging or the firing squad or the electric chair. Lethal injection is a more modern take on a way to carry out capital punishment. But like I said, it's been used since the beginning of U.S. history. Like I also said, though, some states still allow it and some states do not. As of 2018, you can see that the states in dark blue allow the death penalty. Those in light blue do not allow the death penalty, period. And there were a couple of states at the time with a governor-imposed moratorium on the death penalty, meaning they weren't using it at the time. Of those that do use it, most don't use it very often. It used to be used much more frequently than it is today. And so it is much more likely that a person, even if they've done something terrible, will get life in prison type sentence or something like it rather than the death penalty. But it is up to the states whether they'll use it or not, and that's basically been the rule of thumb, um, and it will continue to be. So that's kind of an explanation of the Sixth and Eighth Amendments, which are loaded with information. There's 10 provisions in there, 8 of them in the Sixth Amendment and 2 of them in the Eighth Amendment. And so hopefully that is a little more clarifying and informative for you. So thanks for watching, and talk to you later.